Well, I think she's worried about something she didn't mention, and that is that most of the governments that we see in Europe's capitals, places like London, Paris, Berlin, so forth, are going to be swept away. These are the globalist elites that have been driving us into disaster, starting in February of 2022 with the stupid war against the Russians in support of this corrupt regime in Kiev in the hopes that Russia could be harmed. That failed miserably. We have largely sustained our support for it, unfortunately, but we're no longer talking about it. It has escaped a lot of notice inside the United States. The Russians certainly haven't forgotten about it. And I think then you have to go to the Persian Gulf business. And everybody assumed that this was going to be over in a few days. There was no chance of that. The Iranians have been preparing for decades to deal with this issue. And they have stockpiled a great deal, not just weapons and ammunition, but other things that they need to survive. And their population is firmly behind them. All this nonsense about the population rising up has gone away. So I think she's saying, look, we're all in trouble. We, the elites that are responsible for the debacle that we are in right now, are finally going to be held accountable because we can't do the minimums. What are the minimums? You have to protect the population, shelter the population, feed the population. That's what people in all the Western countries expect their governments to secure for them. We're failing. Now, we haven't failed as miserably yet, but I think we're going to start experiencing these problems. And I think before the summer's out, there's going to be widespread unrest in the United States. Because let's face it, let's assume we stopped today. We just sailed away and said, that's it, we're out. Well, that would not resolve most of the problems and the disputes that we have with the Iranians, but it would at least open the strait up. But the fact that we're blockading the place means that's not going to happen as long as we're blockading. So what are the other options? Negotiate something? You're dealing with a country right now that is firmly in control. It occupies a strategic high ground. It controls the Strait of Hormuz. They're not giving it up. So then what do? Do you go in and viciously attack the place, hope that this time around you can succeed in destroying the entire country? That's what it sounds like to me. And I don't think that's going to work. So at the end of the day, we're probably going to end up disengaging, withdrawing, looking terrible. But instead of rescuing the globe, the global south, everybody in Europe, Asia, from what is a terrible, terrible situation, will get a little out of it. In other words, instead of 10 years, 5 to 10 years to recover from the damage we're doing right now, we may recover from it in 2 years or 1.5 years or something. But I just don't see that happening, Dan. I don't see President Trump being the person that he is, ever admitting under any circumstances that he was wrong. We just stop and look at this nonsense with putting his face on the face of Christ and then being confronted over it. And he lies and says, oh, I thought I was being like a physician, a doctor. The man doesn't have the common sense and the character to simply say, look, I made a mistake. That was in bad taste. It was wrong. I should never have done it. I apologize to everyone who voted for me, who's part of my base, and to all Americans who may be Christians. That was inappropriate. It was a very easy thing for him to do. It's easy if you are a person of character and integrity. But if you're someone who builds on one lie after the next, and that's what I think we're hearing right now about these ephemeral negotiations, you can't do that. And I'm afraid that we're going to be dragged into this major war, and this war is going to finish off the economy globally.
And man, if there's any hope that you were wrong, that would seem to be knocked out by what I'm about to show you. Now, you saw Professor Ahmadian talking about here's where, frankly, the Iranian side is, and he specifically referred to what you did about the control of the Strait of Hormuz as being their big strategic leverage point. He unequivocally said that. So he also laid out what the Iranian side is going to, if there are negotiations, what they're going to require, which are really big pockets here. On the other side of this, you have General Jack Keane laid out, and apparently he gets on the phone frequently to President Trump, and I'm told that he listens to him. Here's what he thinks are going to be the terms.
Our demands are pretty formidable. I mean, we want them to give up their enriched uranium, dismantle all of their capabilities to enrich uranium, and we'll have to be there to verify that. we don't want any enrichment to take place inside of Iran. The second thing is removal of certainly their hold on the Straits of Hormuz and a public declaration to that. When it comes to sanctions, I think what we have to do is recognize their behavior. They say one thing, but what they do is really the critical thing. We have to have anytime, anywhere inspections, but we don't remove sanctions until we are able to verify that there's actually behavior change.
So, Doug, I mean, just to be logical for a second, is there any scenario that you can even wildly think about to where this Iranian side, with the control of the Strait of Hormuz in their fist, are going to say, sure, we're going to give up what Ahmadian just said that they would never give up, their reprocessed material. We're going to hand over control of the strait, and we're not going to ask for any reparations until we prove to your satisfaction that we're going to do something. So, but sure, here's the strait. I mean, that's so irrational, it's to almost be comic.
In Philadelphia, we have an 8-letter word for what General Keane just mentioned. I'll be polite and say it's nonsense. The problem with everything that the man says is that it's based on fantasy. The supposition is part of the, ideological fantasy that's being fed to the American people. We're the best, we're the greatest, we can do anything. They have no choice but to submit or we destroy them. Well, that's not going to work. That's the first thing. It's just not going to work. Secondly, why would you do anything for us at this point without tangible, concrete willingness to negotiate through the 10 points that the Iranians laid out? We're not a reliable negotiating partner, Dan. We lie. You show up, you may be killed during the negotiations. We cheat. We're not honest. And our response is that the Iranians lie and cheat all the time. I've talked to people that were inspectors. I've talked to people that have been involved over there, and they say the opposite is the case. I remember going through this in the Balkans, and people kept insisting the Serbs were dishonest. You couldn't trust anything they say. I found just the opposite. Of the three parties, the Bosniaks, the Croats, and the Serbs were scrupulously honest. If they said they were going to do something, they did it. If they said they wouldn't, they wouldn't. If they were going to show up, they did. This business of constantly demonizing your opponent really makes it very hard to come to some sort of arrangement that terminates the hostilities. And that's effectively what we're doing. We go back to World War II, this World War II nostalgia where nobody actually knows what the hell happened during the Second World War and just how difficult the whole thing was. But we act as though we were the great ones who solved everything, won everything, determined everything. Nothing could be further from the truth. But one of the things tragically that we did is that we so completely demonized our opponents that we made it possible to destroy them completely, to the point where we had to spend 50 years compensating for the destruction of the power they once held. This business of now setting out to destroy Iran because they refuse to accept our terms is equally insane. Only this time around, Iran is in a far better position than we realize. And the Chinese and the Russians and many others are very interested not only in seeing Iran successful and survive, but they want Iran to be a partner in the future with regard to the Strait of Hormuz. We've mentioned this before. The Dardanelles was a failure. The British at least had the presence of mind to come to the Montreux Convention and sign over the rights to determine who goes through or doesn't go through based on very clear, unambiguous conditions to the Turks. There hasn't been a problem in the Straits of with the Convention of Montreux since 1926. It's worked very well, but we insist that we should be the ones to make the determination, and we readily admit that, but for a few items, we're not really that dependent on the Persian Gulf. The rest of the world is. None of this makes any sense, and we're headed for a serious, serious fall. And I think we have to look at the rest of the region. People are not paying attention to what's going on in Turkey. People are not paying attention to Egypt. These countries are gearing up for some action. I don't know exactly when, where, and how, and under what circumstances, but the whole region is turning against us. And we would do well to ignore these so-called Epstein elites that govern the Emirates and places like that in Saudi Arabia. These people are finished. The populations there know they're corrupt and evil and want nothing to do with them. We need to start thinking about our place in the world, not as the world's dictator, but as a participant in what really is a multipolar world. and a world in which there are multiple great powers, and start dealing with people on the basis of mutual respect, not bullying. But that's not going to happen with this president. That's pretty clear.
It's not, and in fact, I would go so far as to say is nobody in power right now. Even you could say the Biden administration in some ways was even worse at the senior level, though that's a hard standard to go beneath. But there was a comment here by an Israeli analyst here that I thought was really poignant. His name is Danny Citrinowitz. Sorry if I didn't pronounce that right. Really, I think quantifies why we're in this trouble. He said, Washington still doesn't understand Iran. Yet again, we are seeing evidence of how poorly Washington understands the Iranian regime. The persistent belief that a single decisive move like a naval blockade, strikes on critical infrastructure, or even targeting and killing senior officials could fundamentally change Tehran's behavior reflects a profound misreading of their system. This point cannot be stressed enough. When faced with the choice between conceding to U.S. demands and escalating a confrontation, it believes it can manage and even win. Iran's decision is not difficult to predict. It will not capitulate. And then I think even the more important things, he said there is no scenario in which one dramatic move forces the Iranian regime to raise a white flag. No pressure campaign, not military actions, and not symbolic shows of force. And yet American polity continues to go after that elusive silver bullet, meaning a single action that will deliver a quick, decisive victory. That search is bound to fail. And I mean, he wrote that, but I mean, it's stuff that you've said many times. But that just goes to show, and whether we're talking Jack Keane, Mike Pompeo, General Keith Kellogg et al., Trump, all these folks, Rubio, Hegseth, they all seem to be of this same, I don't know what you call blindness or self-delusion, but something as an elite cohort, they seem unable to come to what it seems to me to be common sense.
Well, there's a documentary that one can watch on YouTube about Secretary of Defense McNamara, and it's all about Vietnam. And what does he say at the conclusion? We just did not understand their culture. We did not understand the opponent. Well, the sad truth of the matter is there were large numbers of people before 1965, during the Vietnam War, and afterwards who absolutely understood, gave excellent advice, and they were ignored. It wasn't a question of not understanding. It's not wanting to hear the message. That's a big problem in Washington. It's not that there aren't people who know what they're talking about. It's just that there are people that don't care. And President Trump and his so-called advisors, this little circle around him, fall into that category. And I think we have to understand that also characterizes most of the senior military leadership, because I listen to all sorts of nonsense from people about, well, he's a general and he must know, he's an admiral. Come on, give me a break. These people are not there because of demonstrated character, competence, or intelligence. They're there because of their readiness to go along. Say, yes, sir, 3 bags full, let's move out. We got to come to terms with the reality that if you create a culture that favors and advances the sycophant, you're not going to penetrate the inner circle unless you're prepared to go in there and tell the president or whomever is in charge whatever the dickens he wants to hear. That's the bad news. I don't see any of that changing. Maybe the disaster that's looming on the horizon will have an impact.